All right, Apologetics, Class 2.
Almost time for a new book.
Almost time for, you'll be new book in no time at all. So tonight we're going to do two things. We are going to talk about the task of apologetics, and we are going to talk about how then to do apologetics. We did a lot of introduction last week. So tonight we're actually going to say, well, what is the job of the apologist, and how do we accomplish that job? And last week we talked about what is apologetics and why we need apologetics, why it's important. Apologetics is, does anybody remember? What is it?
We apologize for.
Oh, come on.
No. It is the study of defending the faith.
Yes. The study of defending the faith. I heard you say something, Tony, but I didn't hear what it was.
Jason had been going over every time we brought that name up. I would say, "What are you going to apologize for?"
I see. Yes, it's not. I'm sorry. You're wrong.
Apologia.
Apologia means defense in Greek.
Means defense.
Yes.
Okay, so that's where it comes
Stating
from.
Right.
case.
I don't know why in English. I don't know the etymology of how that got into English to mean to be sorry. I mean, I know there's probably a trail,
Sorry,
and
but
you
you're
could look
wrong.
it up.
That's
But-
sorry, but you're wrong.
Right. Okay, and then last week we also talked about the three different kinds of apologetics. What did we say those three different kinds were?
Presuppositional
Classical.
and evidential.
Okay, and then not presuppositional, but let's go with the other two. What is classical apologetics?
Existence of God.
Deals with the existence of God,
Right.
starts with us and works back to God.
Right.
and
They're more philosophical.
in nature.
Philosophical in nature, and what is evidential apologetics?
Tangible, scientific, and
They want to know the details.
details.
It's more evidence driven.
Yeah.
It's more
They look at time and
Yeah,
physics, like
evidential.
archaeological proof.
right, right.
What was that called again?
Evidential
Evidential.
apology. And those two kind of bleed together a little
And they
bit.
focus on the
They,
resurrection.
the person who does what's called classical apologetics, like someone like R.C. Sproul, he will, talk about these arguments for the existence of God, like the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and all these arguments for the existence of God. But then once he establishes God exists, then they say, well, what kind of God exists? How do we know it's our Bible and not somebody else's Bible? Then he'll kind of turn to evidential apologetics. Normally what they focus on is the resurrection. But there are other, in evidential apologetics, they kind of just, like one of the main guys in evidential apologetics who used to be popular a long time ago, he's not as popular anymore, was John Warwick Montgomery. And if you've heard all the apologetics about why we know Jesus rose from the dead, right? And if he rose from the dead, then he's the Son of God, and if he's the Son of God and what he says about the Bible is true, that kind of thing. A lot of that comes from John Warwick Montgomery. John Warwick Montgomery, as I recall, was a lawyer. He's Lutheran, actually, and he's a lawyer. And a lot of those things are rehashed from either his books that you're hearing today, or either rehashed from or taken from his books. And he just goes straight for the resurrection. So he's like, I don't want to talk about anything else. I want to talk about the resurrection of Christ. Here's the evidence. Because if you can prove the resurrection of Christ, then you can prove that he's God. So he kind of works the opposite way. He doesn't really focus too much on whether or not God exists, because if the resurrection is true, then of course God exists. Another popular person in that would be Josh McDowell. Josh McDowell is probably one of the leading evidential apologists. He wrote a whole book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Yes, and then he's had like several updates. When I first got Evidence That Demands a Verdict, it was 2 volumes.
Yeah.
And then he updated it into one big, huge volume. So it's kind of nice. And that's a really good resource, by the way. It's really good. So what's presuppositional apologetics? Why do we call it presuppositional apologetics?
It assumes the Christian worldview.
Yes, it assumes the Christian worldview. So this is why it's called presuppositional. It's because it presupposes the Christian worldview at the outset. It doesn't arrive at it at the end of its argumentation. It presupposes it. And then the other reason why, it wasn't when Van Til kind of was teaching this stuff in seminary, he wasn't really calling it presuppositional apologetics. He was kind of just calling it apologetics. It was kind of his thing. And so the same with Gordon Clark. but people came along and they said, well, we're calling it presuppositional apologetics because it differs from classical and evidential apologetics. And then what was the other thing that they do that kind of makes it why people named it presuppositional apologetics?
Because it attacks presuppositions of unbelief.
Yes, right. It attacks the presuppositions of unbelievers. So kind of the questions behind the questions. We'll get some more of that today. So why do we do presuppositional apologetics rather than the other two apologetics?
So it's devastating to the opposition.
Yes, it's devastating. I find that the presuppositional argumentation, especially developed by Greg Bonson, is absolutely devastating to the unbeliever.
Every video I've watched of him, you just, wow.
He just
smokes them.
wipes them out.
Yes.
Wipes the floor with unbelievers. And then the other thing is
Anybody can do it.
Yep.
anybody can do it.
No,
It really,
no degree required.
one of the things like I hear over and over again so one of the main classical guys is as I said last week is William Lane Craig, and he does a great job in debating the existence of God. But when you hear him debate the existence of God, what I normally hear from the common person is like, I could never do that. There's so many facts that I have to remember and so many philosophical things, and he brings up all these little philosophical, it's like people say, well, I just couldn't do that. This is going to be a tool that anybody can do. And I think that follows a biblical model, because the biblical model says everybody should be able to do apologetics. And that's kind of the third reason. What was the third reason?
Biblical worldview about God and sinners is used.
I think that the presuppositional apologetic takes into account it does. I don't just think it does. It takes into the account the true relationship between God and the person who is on the run from God. God in his sovereignty, and the person being somebody who's not neutral, but who's actually on the run from God. Somebody who in their heart of hearts knows God exists, but has denied the existence of God. So that's kind of why I do. Now, I'm not going to say, some presuppositional apologists have tried to say that the actual arguments for presuppositional apologetics are in the Bible. I don't believe that. At least I haven't been convinced of that. But the ideas of presuppositionalism are certainly in the Bible. We're going to see, God willing, we're going to see that today. Now, I have to say, let me just give a little biographical detail about myself and about the apologetic method you're going to learn, because everybody develops their own apologetic system. Everybody does. It's like martial arts. You will develop you learn a base style, but you learn the shortcuts yourself. You kind of learn your own shortcuts. And that's just you learn the way your own body moves. You learn the way, how you react best to different opponents, and you kind of learn your own system, your own style of martial arts. Now, one of the things that happens in martial arts is what people do is they'll teach the shortcut, right? And then that gets shortcutted even more, and then pretty soon it doesn't even look like the original system anymore, right? So what we try to do is we try to teach the original system and then let them figure it out, kind of let them develop their own system. Some people, there's different theories about that too, about how you should do that. But I'm going to be teaching you my own system of martial arts here, of intellectual martial arts that I use with unbelievers. And it's just something that's kind of bled into me. I'm going to try to stay as close to presuppositional apologetics as I possibly can. The problem is that presuppositionalists fight more with each other than anybody else. There's not nearly, in how to do apologetics, there's not nearly the amount of infighting. Even though there might be fighting on theological issues, there's not nearly the amount of infighting against, like, say, R.C. Sproul and William Lane Craig on how to do apologetics. They'd kind of be more on the same page, even though they're theologically really different. But presuppositionalists, they're all fighting with each other on what really is presuppositionalism. And part of there's several factors that went into that historically. One of them was you had a guy named Cornelius Van Til who came over from the Netherlands, and you had Gordon Clark, and they were very similar, but they disagreed about some really obnoxious things that it's really crazy what they disagreed about. But Clark has his own school and his own followers that aren't quite as popular, and Van Til has his own school and his own followers. Now, Van Til is a great person to listen to, and he's a horrible person to read, because English was not his first language. And so he is just really, really super, super, super difficult to read. And so his students are more popular, by the way. Gordon Clark's students aren't as popular. I mean, unless you're in the field, you kind of know who they are. But Van Til's students are more, they're Greg Bahnsen, Robert Morey, Francis Schaeffer, these people that people know more or less, especially in the Reform world, they know them. John Frame's another one. But they all fight over what Van Til actually said, too. They all fight over what Van Til actually taught. And they're all saying, well, you're abandoning presuppositionalism, and they say, no, you're abandoning you don't understand Van Til. No, you don't understand Van Til. So it gets a little nutty over there. So my earliest influence in apologetics was, as I said last week, was Dr. Walter Martin. Well, but that was mostly cult apologetics. But when I came down to like defending the whole Bible kind of thing, the person who I learned from the earliest and the most was R.C. Sproul. Okay, and he was in the classical method. Now later, when this is back when I was around 15, 16, 17, somewhere around there. And my pastor, he used to have the Tape of the Month Club, and you'd get the R.C. Sproul tapes, and we'd listen to him. He also, in his spare time, did vending machines in Vegas and here and stuff. And so I would go with him sometimes. And we'd go down to Vegas and listen to these tapes by R.C. Sproul on our way, and I'd listen to him too, get him and listen to him. But he was a classical apologist. And then I got introduced to presuppositional apologetics by Greg Bahnsen. For the most part, Greg Bahnsen was the guy that I listened to. And when I first was introduced to presuppositional apologetics, I didn't even know there was a difference. I just thought, oh, that's another cool argument. You know, you've got the cosmological argument, you got the teleological argument, and you've got all of these other arguments, and now you've got the transcendental, or the presuppositional argument. Cool. And I didn't know that they were at war with each other. I had no idea. And so Greg Bahnsen, in one of his tapes, kind of goes through classical apologetics, and he reframes them to be more presuppositional. And I do that with R.C. Sproul. Okay, so like you'll see, and I'm saying this at the outset because I just want you to know this. I say it also for the video because people are going to say, well, you're abandoning presuppositionalism. I'm kind of like a presuppositionalist with R.C. Sproul's arguments. Like I've reframed them into a more presuppositional argumentation. And Bahnsen did that. Bahnsen said that R.C. Sproul was about the closest to a presuppositionalist as you could be. But the other person, like I said, Bahnsen was probably the biggest influence on me as far as, after R.C. Sproul, as far as like learning apologetics. So it's going to be kind of like a mixture between Bahnsen and like a reformatted R.C. Sproul kind of a thing. Morey didn't really have a huge influence on me apologetically. He had more of an influence on me theologically, although some of his apologetic will come out. Francis Schaeffer even further. He does great work, but it didn't really influence me as far as like how I do apologetics. But he has a great, if you ever get a chance to watch a film series, it's on YouTube, it's free, it's called How Should We Then Live? I really, really suggest you watch it. It's by Francis Schaeffer. Each session's only about a half hour long, and it's really cool. Like, it's an apologetic series, but it's like an old-timey, well, not old-timey, I mean, it looks old-timey, like, 70s, late 70s, 80s. But he'll talk about things like he'll talk about, like, the development of ideas, and he'll be standing there and a chariot will go by. It's not just a lecture. It's like a film. It's really cool. Like he'll go in and sit on a bed and he'll say like, this is a particular, and it's really, he'll show art and how art affected life and stuff like that. So it's really cool. All right, so enough of that, but that's kind of laying the groundwork. What's the task of the apologists? What are we to do? I know we're to defend the faith, but exactly how? So there are two tasks that I want you to get down in your mind. We're going to break these apart. The first task is that you have to properly, this would be your first task, you have to properly explain the Christian worldview to the non-believer. Okay, that would be task number one. Your job as an apologist is going to be able to properly explain what the Christian position is. You can't ignore this when you're talking with somebody about why you're a Christian. You have to be able to defend that, of course, but you also have to be able to properly articulate what your position is, and particularly what your position is over against what the unbeliever might think your position is. Because a lot of times the unbeliever is misinformed about the Christian worldview. And you've run into things like, oh, I can't be a Christian. What do you think we do? Are you thinking you're going to go to heaven just float around on clouds all day? Right? Well, what's happening, that kind of objection is a misunderstanding of Christianity. We don't believe that we're just going to float around on clouds all day. We believe that we are going to fully be able to develop all of our talents without the impediment of sin, with God present with us at the time, So that's a misunderstanding. Another misunderstanding is something like, well, you believe God sends innocent people to hell? Innocent people? Never heard? He sends innocent people to hell? Well, that's a misunderstanding of the Christian position. We don't believe God sends innocent people to hell. Nobody's innocent, right? So you have to be able to properly explain what the Christian position is and explain it within the Christian system so that even though the unbeliever might not believe it, he might understand what it is you believe on given your worldview, okay? Given what you believe about the Bible, like if the Bible's true. So a popular one is, the Bible's contradictory, in the Old Testament, you weren't supposed to eat pork, and now you can eat pork, and, what is that? You just say Old Testament, New Testament, right? You just say Old Testament, you just wave it away, Old Testament, you don't have to do it anymore, right? You've heard that before, as though that's dismissive. Well, you have to be able to properly explain to the person, no, what we believe is that in the Old Testament there was a covenant, and covenants create laws that are specific to covenants, and once that covenant is gone, those laws are gone. It's not just we throw it away, because we didn't like it anymore. That's not the idea behind it. You see, so you have to be able to properly explain what it is. And when you hear an objection to the Christian faith, you have to be able to say, okay, is this person, first of all, are they misunderstanding something about the Christian worldview? So what are some misconceptions you've heard about the Christian worldview?
The Trinity is a big one.
Okay, that's a good one, yes. What will they say about the Trinity?
Well, they'll say they can't understand how that God could be three people, but yet three people.
Yep.
And they want to use the word people or persons, but yet one. And
they want to use one person.
One person.
Three person and one person.
Which is,
a misunderstanding of the Trinity. A total misunderstanding what the
and,
Trinity is.
They want to say things like, well, if that's what God is, he'd be a really big God. And I'm like, yeah.
Right.
That's exactly it. They want to, a lot of times in misunderstanding the Trinity, they want to demean Christ's deity to make him a lesser God rather than full equality of God. But then, we know in Colossians it says, for in Christ dwells all the fullness of the Godhead. That's a big one.
Misunderstandings of the Trinity, right and left. That's a big thing, especially when it comes to cult apologetics.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to properly explain, because one of the things a cult apologetics will do, or anybody will do, sometimes intentionally, most of the time non-intentionally, is just kind of set up a straw man. Like, oh, well, that's stupid. How can God be a 3 persons in 1 person? Well, we're not saying he's 3 persons in 1 person. We're saying he's 3 persons in 1 being, who is God. We're not debating that there's more than 1 person, more than 1 being who is God. What are some other misconceptions you've run into about Christianity? Can you think? If you can't think of any, we can go on.
If we're saved by faith alone, then does that mean you can just go sin and do whatever you want?
Right. Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, you're gonna run into that all the time. Well, you just believe that Jesus. You just say you're a Christian. You're a Christian.
Get out of jail free card. You can do whatever you want.
Right. And so what we have to do in those cases is be able to explain the true Christian position. We have to be able to explain the true Christian position on theological issues, but also on sociological issues as well, like pollution or abortion or ethical issues or something. We have to be able to explain, like, somebody says, well, Christians don't care about the planet. You're just a bunch of greedy capitalist pigs. Like, no, we do. We care about the planet. The reason we care about our planet is because we believe that as a Christian, we are ambassadors of God, that God made this planet. This is why we don't torture animals. That's why we don't do that stuff. Animals aren't exalted to the way the vegans exalt them, but we have a true understanding of where they are in the pecking order of God's existence. So we have the ability to explain that. So in short, the idea is that a lot of your job as a Christian apologist is to be able to do proper theology. A lot of it is going to come down to proper theology. You have to be able to properly articulate the Christian worldview when it comes to issues regarding ethics, social issues, theological issues, whatever those issues are, okay? And the second thing that you have to do is you have to refute the I'm just going to say Christian worldview, okay? That's the second thing you have to be able to do, is refute the non-Christian worldview. That's where we're going to be spending most of our time. But for example, I'll just give you an example of this, and that's, let's say somebody's a pantheist. Don't run into those as much as you used to, but especially in this area. But let's say somebody's a pantheist, and they want to complain about pollution, or you're talking to somebody who's like, well, I'm just I believe God's in everything and everything's in God. And then at the same time, they're complaining about their neighbor's dog who poops on the lawn. So, well, you believe everything's God. That's just, poop is God. If everything's God, then poop's God. That's not a problem. That's just God being united to God. The dog's, you have to force people into understanding, into accepting their worldview, and you have to push that antithesis. So, you crumple up a piece of paper on the floor. They say they want to complain about pollution. This used to be a little bit more popular, even back in the 90s, where people would be kind of more pantheist, kind of like God's in everything, we're all God. And then they would wanted to complain about pollution. Well, I throw a piece of paper, crumble up on the floor. What's the problem with that on your worldview? That's just God being united to God. This is God. That's God. What's the problem on your world? Now, as a Christian, I understand why that's a problem, because on my worldview, we are stewards of this planet. We are to take care of this planet. Okay, so we're to refute the non-Christian worldview. Okay, so now we're going to get into how. That's a big one. Refute the non-Christian worldview. All right, go home, everybody. How do we do that? Let me erase these two, because I'm going to start writing numbers and letters again up on the board. So how do you refute the Christian worldview? So I'm going to Miyagi you for a second here. Remember?
Wax on, wax off.
Right. They went through this thing and they learned a lot of stuff. And like, how does this apply? And then finally it gets them and they're like, oh, wow, I see all this stuff makes sense. Mm-hmm. So we're going to digress here. I'm going to Miyagi you for a second.
Oh, dude, I hate forms.
Well, these aren't
No,
forms.
these aren't forms. These-
All right.
I hate forms.
So,
Inward block.
number one, you have to realize that everyone has a world view, okay? Everyone has a world view. That's great. What's a world view? A world view is a network of beliefs and ideas. Okay, that's what a world view is. So what's a world view? What? It's a network of ideas. It's like a spider web almost, like, stuff at the
Ideas
center.
and beliefs.
Ideas, beliefs, theories.
Okay.
And people have beliefs, and people even have beliefs about their beliefs. Okay, and people are self-deceived on this worldview. They believe one thing, but they believe that they believe something about that. You have a network of ideas. That's a worldview. Everybody's got a worldview. You have a worldview, I have a worldview. The idea that we have beliefs about our beliefs, a good example of this was given by Greg Bahnsen. He wrote his dissertation on the paradox of self-deception. And he gave the example of, this mother who has this son, this is her only son, this is her pride and joy, little Johnny. And Johnny's been getting into trouble at school, right? He's been stealing lunches from kids and stuff like that. And she goes down and says, "Oh, you guys, you are, you're just giving us a hard time.
Making it up.
You're making it up. Blah blah blah. This is horrible." And she even moves the kid to another school. So on that basis, you would say she believes the innocence of her son, right? I mean, there's evidence that she believes the innocence. She'll go down there, she'll stick up for Johnny, she'll tell the principal that they're wrong about him. There's a lot of evidence that she believes that her son is innocent and that these are problems that are made up for other reasons. But the other problem is that she won't leave her purse alone in the room with Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime that on TV when someone steals, she'll start going, you shouldn't steal. People shouldn't steal in this life. It's really wrong to steal. It's really wrong to be a bully. It's really wrong. Now, does she believe in the innocence of her son or not?
No.
No or yes? Well, yes and no.
She does, but
She has beliefs about her beliefs. Okay, so worldviews can get complicated. They're a network of ideas. They're a network of beliefs. They're a network of philosophies, and people have beliefs about their beliefs. The second thing you want to know about this is that all facts are interpreted through a worldview. What you accept about a fact, what you believe about a fact, will be interpreted through your worldview. So a guy believes he's dead. He has the cycle. He says, "I'm a dead guy. I'm walking dead. The walking dead." He says, "I'm dead." He tells the doctor, "I'm dead." He goes into the psychologist. The psychologist is like, "You're not dead. I am dead." You're like, "Oh, well," the psychologist thinks, "Okay, I got him. I think I got him." He says, "Do dead men bleed?" He says, "Well, no, my heart's not pumping, so obviously not." So he takes out a needle. He's going to show him the facts. He pricks his finger. Blood comes out. He says, "See, you're not dead." He goes, "Well, I'll be. Dead men do bleed." See, the facts are interpreted on his worldview. This is why we're going to use facts. But if you just bombard people with facts, it's no good. You have to attack their presuppositions. So you're giving Larry all these facts about the Bible has this amount of evidence behind it, and we've got all this evidence about the resurrection, about this, and what does he do? Well, we've got a living prophet, right? It was all swept away. Nothing that you said was wrong. You quoted logical people, logical sources. Did he go, no, that's some pretty... He said, no. He said, because he has a deeper held belief that what the prophet says is better than those facts. See, so he has a deeper belief in which he adjusts facts. Now, we do the same thing. We're going to talk about that Christians... See, everybody has a worldview, including us. So when somebody comes along and shows that there might be a contradiction in the Bible, we do the same thing. We go, well, no, that's not a contradiction. Now, we think we have good reasons for that, but you understand that we have presuppositions just like the unbeliever has presuppositions. Our presupposition is that the Bible's the Word of God. So when someone comes along and gives us an alleged contradiction, well, we readjust that to make sure that there isn't a contradiction. Now, I believe through the evidence that there isn't contradictions as well, but you see, the whole reason I'm readjusting it is because I believe that this is the Word of God. And we spent some time on those different kind of things, like with the resurrection and stuff. Pretty reasonable way, but you see, an unbeliever doesn't see it. They got a different presupposition. They look at that and they say, oh, the Bible's contradictory. Why would I be a Christian? It has these contradictions in it. See, so it's not facts versus facts. It's presuppositions versus presuppositions. And if you never deal with the person's presuppositions, you might as well not even use the facts. Because the facts are just going to be thrown away on that individual. You have to deal with the person's presuppositions. Okay, now the third thing you have to understand about this is at the bottom of this worldview are, at the very bottom of this worldview are presuppositions. What's a presupposition? Presupposition is a fundamental belief that is accepted on its own authority. It's a fundamental belief that's accepted on its own authority. It has to verify itself. So when we're talking about, like, say, this spider web of beliefs out here, and then, you get more in here, and then until you get down to the middle one, very basic ones are presuppositions. Now, you might be able to clip a web out here or two. You might be able to snap a web, but that's not going to do too much. Somebody might readjust their belief, But you start clipping webs in here, and the whole thing starts to fall apart. So let me give you an example of some presuppositions. The basic reliability of the senses would be one of them. For example, like if I used this before, like, so if James and I are arguing about how much a hamburger costs at Morty's, okay, we're like, okay, does it cost, I don't know, I'm not sure. Does it cost $10 or $9, all right? Does it cost $10 or $9? And he's sure that it costs $10. And I'm sure, I have a belief that it costs $9. And we go and we find out, lo and behold, he's right. It's $10, right? Now, I don't go, oh, my worldview, that's just, it's all destroyed. That's a belief out here. That's a belief that, I could deal with it or not. But what if he tried to convince me that I can say that I misread the sign, right? But what if he tried to convince me that I couldn't trust the reliability of my senses? You couldn't do that with me, right? I couldn't do that with you. Let's say that you were wrong and I was right, okay? And I said, you would just say, oh, I was wrong. I must have misread the sign, right? What if I said, yeah, but the real problem, James, is you can't trust your senses at all. See, your senses mislead. You'd say, no, I can trust my senses. I just misunderstood them. Okay? So your sense perception is closer to the inside of the web, right? That's a basic fundamental belief in which other beliefs spring out of. So another fundamental belief would be like everybody has parents, right? Now, let's say, is anybody in here adopted? I'm not. I just was raising it. Okay, so you're not adopted, right? Okay, all right. But what if, could I convince you that you were adopted? How much evidence would I have to bring to be able to convince you? Probably pretty a lot, but it wouldn't necessarily be out of the question. Let's say you were adopted and somebody said, well, I look exactly like my mom. Say, yeah, but you were actually, it was your aunt. And so this is why the family, see, I could explain everything under this. So it would be hard, it would be difficult. That'd be a little closer to the center. But then I brought the documentation. I brought it from the courts. Eventually you'd be like, oh, okay, the parents who I thought were my parents aren't my parents. Okay? But what if I tried to convince you that you didn't have parents? That you just sprang out of existence? How many people think that's nonsense? What kind of evidence would I have to bring in order to there would be no evidence, right? There'd be no evidence. You'd be like, that's a fundamental belief that people have parents.
You need a spaceship.
Yeah, that's a fundamental belief that you came from somewhere. So at the center of these, now, not all presuppositions are created equally. Those are some presuppositions that a lot of people share in common. But some people have the presupposition that the prophet can't be wrong. That's it. That's their presupposition. The prophet of the LDS Church can't be wrong. The Watchtower can't be wrong. The Pope can't be wrong. Those are their presuppositions. Okay, so not all presuppositions are created equal, but basically they have beliefs, but those beliefs rest on other beliefs that are lower than those. So their belief about, well, I believe you have to be baptized to go to heaven. Well, why do you believe that? Because the church told me. Well, eventually you get down to a presupposition. Well, I just accept it. That's where I accept it. That's the bottom line. I believe that because that's what it is. That's the whole thing. So understand that on this world, on worldviews are made up of beliefs, and at the very foundation of those beliefs are presuppositions. So we've got to get to the presuppositions. Now, I should have written more. So I'm going to erase this. Has everybody got this? But I mean, we're still under how, okay? So I'm not departing from this. It's just I'm running out of room here. Okay, now, the next thing you have to understand about presuppositions is that with your presuppositions and then your beliefs out there, this creates, which one were we on? 4, 5?
Well, you need to do 4.
Okay, 4. This creates a philosophy of life, which is kind of another way to say a presupposition. But on the philosophy of life, you're going to understand that people have basically 3 philosophies. This is it. It's a 3-man marching band, okay? The first one is empiricism. The second one is rationalism. And the third one is mysticism. That's it. The bottom line of every worldview, you're going to find that everything that they believe about life is going to come down to one of these 3. Now, normally it's a combination, but one of them will win out. Okay, one of them will be like, well, empiricism is I want evidence. You know, if you can show it to me, if you can chop it and bring me a pound of it, I'll believe it. They have and everything in their life, every decision that they make, whether religious or whatever, comes down to, well, it's empirically verifiable. I believe it because I believe somewhere that it's empirically verifiable. Okay, so at least maybe if I can't empirically verify it, but my professor at the college, he can empirically verify it. Somebody who wrote the book can empirically verify it. Other people are more rationalists. They're like, well, it doesn't make sense to me, or it does make sense to me. It makes sense to me that a woman should have the right to choose because it's her body, and that makes rational sense. So you're talking to somebody, you got to find out which of these 3 they are. They're rational, they're empiricist, they're rationalist, or they're mysticists. A mysticist is going to be somebody who it feels right to them. I can't get past the feeling of my heart, you know. Now, what's tricky about this is these people, you can have 3 different people, and they all can believe the exact same thing for radically different reasons. Okay, they can believe the exact same thing, but for radically different reasons. So, for instance, somebody says, like, oh, well, I don't believe in eternal hell. Okay, let's just use that one for an example. They could say, an empiricist would be like, well, I don't see any evidence for hell. It's not part of my experience. This would be like your atheist kind of person. So it's not part of my experience. You can't bring me a pound of it. So I don't believe in hell. Another person would be a rationalist, would be like, well, the idea of hell is unthinkable to me. That doesn't make sense to me. If I were God, I wouldn't do it that way. They're thinking in terms of rationality. A mysticist would be like, I couldn't imagine a God who loves doing that. I couldn't imagine it, okay? So people can hold the exact same belief, all three of them holding the exact same belief, but for radically different reasons. Now, normally it's a combination of these reasons, but one of them will win out. You're either more an empiricist, you're either more of a rationalist, or you're either more of a mysticist, okay? All right. 5. Most people...
Would you say again, I'm sorry?
Most people do not know what their worldview is or how they got it. Most people do not know what their worldview is or how they got it. They're not what's called epistemologically self-conscious. Those are your big word names for that. They couldn't tell you. They're normally people, because they don't think about these things. They can't say, oh, I'm an empiricist.
Say that again. They are not what?
They are epistemologically, not epistemologically self-conscious.
I like big words.
They normally, from where they were raised, cartoons they watched, they literally pick them up like dogs from fleas. Just sounded good to them at the time. It's like, oh, well, I believe that, if it really comes down to it, I can just call on the supernatural and I'll be able to do whatever it is that I need. Well, they learned that from He-Man. They were watching cartoons one day and I had the power. They saw that and they thought, well, that's a good idea. Or the Force from Star Wars or something like that. People, that's what, they don't know where they got it and they normally couldn't explain it. And part of what your job is going to do is to help them understand what their worldview is, to help them to be more epistemologically self-conscious. But most people don't know it. They don't have an idea of what it is. They don't really go around thinking about it. Our friend Larry's not walking around thinking about, well, my basic presupposition is that the prophet can't be wrong. No, it comes out, but he's not walking around going, I'm going to interpret that fact in light of my basic presuppositions, which are, he just doesn't think that way. People don't normally think that way. They're normally not self-conscious about why they believe, what they believe, how they determine, and how they evaluate facts, and how they determine ethics and beauty and everything about life. They don't understand their own worldview. Okay. And the last thing that you need to understand, I was going to write 5 again, that would be dumb, is that the non-Christian has beliefs and presuppositions the non-Christian has beliefs and presuppositions that can only make sense if the Christian worldview is true. Okay? Let me give you a very simple way to say this. These are going to be things. This is going to be a epistemologically self-conscious. You're just going to be saying this stuff in your sleep. Unbelief presupposes belief. Unbelief presupposes belief. Atheism presupposes theism.
Okay, one more time, unbelief.
Presupposes belief. Unbelief presupposes belief. They have beliefs and presuppositions that can only be justified on the Christian worldview. They can't justify things like morality. Doesn't matter what you're arguing. Sometimes we get caught up in arguing about a thing, but arguing about morality at all requires Christianity to be true. And I'm going to name that tune. I'm not just going to say that. I'm going to name that tune. And when we start seeing how we use this to fight, okay? What were you going to say?
What was the second thing you said? You said unbelief presupposes
Atheism presupposes theism. This is to say what the Bible says, and that is that everybody knows the God of the Bible. They don't just know about a God in general. They know the God of the Bible. Romans 1 teaches us that they know about the God, a God of the Bible.
There are no remote pygmies on the far side of the world.
Now that doesn't mean they know everything about God. We're just talking that they know that there is a God and that they're accountable to Him. That's what God has revealed in nature. Okay, what God has revealed in His book is different. Okay, but they know enough to be accountable, and why they know enough to be accountable is because when you do it to them, they get upset. So if they steal from you, that's fine. You steal from them. Hey, they don't need a Bible. They can see the light of creation and the inner conscience testify that they're sinful and that they need a way out of that. Okay, so let me erase all this. Now we're going to start moving into the clash of the worldviews. Okay, so everybody has a worldview, and this is foundational. Now that we know what a worldview is, we've gone through everything, what a worldview is, what it's made up of, those kind of things. You have a worldview, and I have a worldview. And because you have a worldview and the unbeliever has a worldview, neutrality is a myth. Don't fall for the myth of neutrality. There are no brute facts in which, if we just both kind of reason with these facts correctly, or if we just both use our minds right, or if we just both use empiricism right, you'll be able to see things my way. No, there is no neutrality. Now, I want you to understand, they're not neutral, and you shouldn't pretend to be neutral. They want you to do that. They want to pretend like they are neutral. Like, well, I'm just looking at the world the way it is, and you're looking at it religiously. No, you're looking at it religiously too. It's just undefined religion, and I'm looking at it religiously as well. There's no neutrality, okay? They're not neutral, and you shouldn't be neutral, okay? Now we're going to get into some biblical text when it comes to this. They're not neutral, and you shouldn't pretend to be neutral. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. I like the NIV better. I'm going to ask you to read that. I was just looking at this and I'm like, this is my favorite.
Which one is it again?
1 Peter 3:15. Will you read that, Jennifer?
Yes. But in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
But do this with gentleness and respect.
Okay, all right. So what are we supposed to do with Christ? We're supposed to put him at the end of our reasoning when we do apologetics? First, we're supposed to set Christ apart as Lord. As Lord. So when we're not neutral.
One thing.
We're not neutral. So we shouldn't pretend to be neutral. And we're going to see that they're not neutral either. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 10. verse 4, it says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not the flesh, not of flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty position raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ." So we start out and we're doing this, because we're taking every thought captive. Our thoughts aren't neutral. We need to have captivity in our thoughts. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. "For the word of the cross is folly," or foolishness, "to those who are perishing." The Bible doesn't describe your opponent as neutral. It describes them as somebody who is looking at your position as foolishness. It goes, verse 21, "For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom." They're not going to be able to take their neutral position and just use it correctly and reason their way to God. They're not going to be able to do that. It has to be a revelation from God. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. "For the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him. He is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned." Not neutral. Romans 8, verse 6. "For the mind set on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. For the mind set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God." Okay, so does it sound like it's creating neutrality? No, it's not. It's not neutral. Turn to Psalm 110.
Psalm 110.
No, sorry, 111, verse 10. If I wrote it down here right. Yeah, I did write it down here right. Okay. I didn't underline it yet in this one, so that's why I question it. Psalm 111, verse 10.
Hang on. Almost there.
"The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." It's not the end of wisdom. It's not like, well, we have wisdom and then, boy, we work our way up and then we get to the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. "All those who practice it have a good understanding. His praise endures forever." So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All right, so now there's no neutrality. They're not neutral. You shouldn't pretend to be neutral. They have beliefs that they take without question, although they don't understand that they do this. They don't think that they do this. They're not walking around epistemologically self-conscious. That they have beliefs that they take at face value that they don't question either, but they do. So part of your job is going to be to expose that. That's what you're going to be doing. And there's basically a twofold method. Turn to Proverbs chapter 26. So this is the twofold method of this type of apologetics.
26.
Verses 4 and 5. "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." Okay? So do you not answer or do you answer? Well, yeah, it's both. Okay? Remember, these are proverbs. They're pithy insights. It's like if you say many hands make light work, too many cooks spoil a stew. Well, which is true? They're both true. They're pithy insights into situations. So let me give you an example apologetically of what it is we're going to do. So this person has a worldview. This is the non-Christian worldview, and then you have a worldview. Okay, the Christian worldview. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. You're going to step on his worldview for the sake of argumentation and demonstrate the foolishness of his worldview. And then you're going to, now it's not like you do this one first and then this. You might do a little of this one, then a little of this one, then a little of this. Each situation and the call for itself. But then you're going to jump back on your worldview and you're going to say, see, my worldview doesn't suffer from the problems that you have. Okay, so when you're looking at this, when you jump on the non-Christian worldview, these are the two things you're looking for. And this is where all this is going to boil down to. These are the two things you're looking for. You're going to do an internal critique of his worldview. You're going to answer a fool according to his folly. And you're going to look for inconsistency, and arbitrariness. Inconsistency and arbitrariness. And then next week what we will do is we will take this worldview and we will take this method, and then we will start with atheism. Then we'll go from atheism to evolution. We'll talk a bit about evolution. And then we will go into philosophical objections. Then we'll go into false objections. Now you're going to learn this, and then what we are going to do is we're going to role play a little bit.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm going to be Mr. Atheist at times. We'll have a time where I'm going to be Mr. Atheist. We'll have a time where I'm going to be Mr. Mormon. I'm going to be Mr. Jehovah's Witness. I'm going to be Mr. Catholic. But we're going to take this and we're going to go through these. Now, when we look for inconsistency and arbitrariness, just a quick example of those two. An inconsistency would be something like, you're telling me that the world is just matter in motion. You're an atheist, just for an example. Okay, but you're also telling me that you believe in meaning. Well, how do you get meaning on matter in motion? How is that possible? So you have an internal inconsistency in your worldview. And so what you're going to do is you're going to jump on this and look for the internal inconsistencies in their worldview. You're going to let them talk. You're going to let them, but they're going to give you enough rope to hang themselves. Also, arbitrariness. Arbitrariness is like, well, you just elevated one thing over another for no good reason. You just did it for no reason. It's just arbitrary. You just like, well, I don't think we should blow up buildings. It's like, well, I agree. We shouldn't blow up buildings. He goes, well, but you're telling me people evolved. People evolved to blow up buildings. People also evolved to love their family. You've arbitrarily chosen one over the other. Why aren't these people right? They chose a different one. You're being arbitrary in your decisions. You don't have a foundation. Now I'm going to jump back over my Christian worldview. I'm going to say, see, as a Christian, if God exists and if he's the creator and he's given us a rule of life, then I have a really good reason to believe that people shouldn't fly into buildings and destroy them. I have a really good reason to believe in ethics and meaning in life. See, I'm not going to answer a fool according to his folly. So this is what the rest of this course is going to look like now that we've got this foundational stuff out of the way. Does everybody understand this?
Yes.
Okay, are there any questions? Let's rock and roll. You ready to get out?
No, ready to get in.
Oh, you're ready to see this kind of thing in action.
I've been doing apologetics for over 35 years, but I developed my own worldview on how to do that. And part of it was with Walter Martin. I also, read a lot and listened to his tapes and developed my own kind of way of doing things. And I have found over the years that
people don't like it.
Yeah, they don't. They don't like it.
Yeah.
And I found that I end up being more evidential than presuppositional.
Mhm.
I have been in that camp for a very long time. Somebody will say something, and I will back it up with scripture and show the evidence of where their worldview is wrong, but then I don't know where to go from there.
Right, yeah. So hopefully this will help, and all the evidence in the world is still on your side. We're all still going to be using all the evidence that there is. We're not shying away from evidence. It's just a question of we're going to hit them in their presupposition. We're going to use evidence to, like I said, with the prosecuting attorney on the stand. Well, you said you were here, and I got a tape that says you were here. I'm using evidence, but I'm using it to do an internal critique of their system, to show their inconsistencies. So a Mormon would say something like, well, I can't believe the Bible because it mentions books like the War of the Kings, and we don't have that book anymore. So, well, I can't believe the Book of Mormon because you had the first 116 pages missing. It was the Book of Lehi, So that's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, I'm using that fact to embarrass them. I'm using that fact to demonstrate an inconsistency in what they're saying. So all the facts are yours. You're going to use them all. We're just going to use them a little differently. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Something I was thinking about when we were talking about the different views of the world. And one thing that came to my mind, and this was from the very beginning, I mean, I can say I was a believer since a child because I grew up in Catholicism, and so it was locked in my head like we were talking about through my experiences or my family raising. But what I noticed, and I believe I was in that role, was a lot of people don't understand the denominations. They link religion as being one thing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you're this, you're that, don't matter. You believe in something that I don't.
Yeah.
So they kind of put you in one place, regardless of whether you're Mormon, Christian, Catholic, Baptist. It doesn't matter. They look at you the same.
Right.
And I run into that a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be part of the first part is being able to correctly articulate.
Right.
So you're mistaken. These things are different. If they're even interested in hearing.
Yes. And that's,
Whatever.
You'll find that view very prevalent in people who have left the LDS Church.
Right. They kind of lump them all together.
Yep.
All right.
You're
Well,
all crazy. That was where I went.